This week's parsha is Parshat Acharei Mot. This is actually true in Chutz La'aretz. In Eretz Yisrael, they are actually currently on Kedoshim because last week in Chutz La'aretz it was still Pesach on Shabbat, so we did the Torah reading for then. Whereas in Eretz Yisrael, Pesach was already over, so they already went ahead with the weekly parsha. But we'll sync up in a few weeks; all will be well. But for now, Acharei Mot, at least in Chutz La'aretz. So what I want to speak about today is actually focuses on the end of Parshat Acharei Mot, which talks about the Gilu Arayot, right? The illicit relations, the forbidden relationships that we are not allowed to engage in. Now, what's interesting about this and what draws a lot of commentary is the fact that Parshat Acharei Mot is the central feature of Parshat Acharei Mot is the Avodat Yom Kippurim. This is where it's described. And what is the same parsha that's talking about the Avodat Yom Kippurim doing with the Gilu Arayot? That seems, very inappropriate. You could put Gilu Arayot anywhere else, just don't put it here. So what is that doing? And moreover, we know obviously, Parshat Acharei Mot is not only the parsha for this week, but it's also what we read on Yom Kippur, which makes sense because it's the Avodat Yom Kippurim. However, we also read the Gilu Arayot on Yom Kippur for Mincha of Yom Kippur. Now that also seems extremely inappropriate. We've just gone through this whole day of holiness, of prayer, spending hours in shul, and we're close to Ne'ilah. It's the culmination, the climax of Yom Kippur, and this is what we're reading at Mincha. Really? What's the depth here? Now you can imagine that this brings on many commentaries to explain why we're reading this seemingly strange parsha, really, the Gilu Arayot. But what's the depth of meaning here? What's going on? Now, I believe I've heard this from Rabbi Tatz. I cannot remember exactly where I heard it. It was a few years ago, but it was such a powerful idea, I wanted to share it. So, what is this doing here? Now, in order to understand the context of this, we need to take a step back and be like, well, how does Judaism see relationships in general? In terms of, relationships between man and wife, how does Judaism, view that? Is that something, is that ideal? Is that good? That is to say, if a man and woman get married, is that a good thing, or is that just kind of a necessary evil? So amazingly, the reason why this might be a question is because in many spiritual systems, if you were to ask somebody, just a friend of yours or someone off the street, just an average person, what would you say if someone's trying to become more spiritually in tune? They want to become a more spiritual person. What should they do? Most people would say, you probably shouldn't engage so much in the material world. If you're going to extremes, or you really want to become holy, you should go up onto the mountaintops or into the forest. You should become secluded. You should, not, drink and eat so much, at least not such pleasurable things. You should definitely stay away from the opposite gender. And yet Judaism doesn't see it like that. We call the process of getting married, right? It's a two-step process. There's Kiddushin and Nisuin, but that first step is called Kiddushin, Kedusha, unbelievable, holiness, sanctification. Now, what does that word mean, Kedusha? We may have spoken about this before, but my Rosh Yeshiva is first Rabbi Tatz actually mentions that the idea of Kedusha means separation. When we do Kiddush on Friday night, right, for Shabbat, then what we're doing a Kiddush because we're separating between Shabbat and Yemei Chol and the other ordinary mundane days. So it's a process of separation. We want to make sure we understand that Shabbat is different. Moreover, with Kiddushin, what happens? You are separating this woman from all other women, or specifically, this woman that you are now married to is now usher to all other men. She's forbidden to all other men. So again, the process of separation. But my Rosh Yeshiva, and these don't necessarily contradict, but my Rosh Yeshiva says Kedusha means passionate connection. When we're doing Kiddush on Friday night for Shabbat, and of course the next day on Saturday morning, we're engaging passionately with Shabbat. We're connected to Shabbat. That's what it's about. When you do Kiddushin, when a man gets married to a woman, they are now passionately connected. That's what it's about. And so we see that this idea of relations is not something that's to be avoided. It is the ideal. And Ramban talks about it. The Rabbi Yehuda Halevi and the Kuzari talks about it. The Vilna Gaon talks about it. That this process of a man being with a woman is a beautiful relationship as long as it's engaged in properly. Now, so what's this perspective on Arayot? So here, Judaism is showing that this whole idea of relations is two sides of the same coin. There's a side of sanctification, of Kiddushin, right? Where the beauty and the depth of this act is brought about. There's also the exact opposite, that it could be the worst, the depth of perversion, and we can see that in Parshat Vayeshev, what is a harlot called? A prostitute. What are they called? This is something that, they use this for money. It's like, literally going to the absolute lowest of the low. And what is that called? We see it's called the Kadesha. In chapter 38, verse 21, we'll just read it in Hebrew because that's obviously the key term. This is Yehuda trying to figure out where Tamar is, though of course he didn't realize it was Tamar yet. So, Anshe Mekoma Lemor, Ayeh HaKadesha, Hi Vayinaim, Aladarech, Vayomru, Vaitavazeh Kadesha. So what does that mean? He inquired of the people of her place, where is the prostitute, the one at the crossroads by the road? And they said there was no prostitute here. That's amazing. So you see this Kadesha, it's the same root, Kadosh. What's going on here? So you see again, this whole institution of relations can be used for sanctification, right? For passionate connection, but it could also be the exact opposite. And that is a key and beautiful point, and that is why we read it. And by the way, just to bring this out, we see the process of a person who uses this correctly it's very ennobling. At the end of the day, when we actually, my wife and I, we listened to George Bush Jr.'s eulogy about his father, George Bush Sr., of course, at least the one that was shown on television. And one of the things I thought was so beautiful that George Bush said about his father was that, his father apparently got married fairly young, and George Bush said, my father was a one-woman kind of man. He never veered. He was loyal to the end. And that was actually, in contrast to some, say, other presidents who were at that ceremony. But we see that there is a certain type of it was noble. There's a certain sense of nobility that's used with someone who can control himself in that way. And you can imagine the kinds of temptations and the kinds of people that the president surrounds himself with, and the kinds of things that are thrown at him. And yet he stayed true, and he stayed true to his wife. And that was beautiful. And that was one of the things that George Bush said about his father. But then, so how does this relate to this week's Parsha and to Yom Kippur? So you see that this same process, right, that can be used on the holiest day, this is how we're supposed to use it. This is the proper perspective that we're supposed to use it, and we're supposed to see it to be like, where is it inappropriate so that we can know how to funnel this energy correctly. And then finally, we know that next week's Parsha is Parshat Kedoshim, or this week, of course, in Eretz Yisrael. And there's no coincidence. The fact that the Gilu Arayot is contrasted with Kedoshim is, I don't think Rashi says this explicitly, but it's certainly alluded to in his second comment in Parshat Kedoshim next week. What do we see? So there's his first comment, Daber el Kol Adat B'nei Yisrael. That's the first that's the second pasuk. And then what does it say? V'amarta aleim Kedoshim tihiyu, ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokeichem. And Rashi says, Kedoshim tihiyu, hevu prushim min ha'arayot u'min ha'avera. Separate yourselves from the arayot, from illicit relationships, and from any averas. Shekol makom sheta motze geder erva ata motze kedusha. Any place where you find a boundary around erva, you find kedusha, you find holiness. And then he cites at least 3 different sources for this. But of course, the most immediate one we see is just from last week. We see the Gilu Arayot, and then immediately after that, Kedoshim to you. And that's no coincidence. Shabbat Shalom, and I'll see you next week.